Hi y'all. Want to do a video on a very important issue because I saw some information that made me think. Uh, One of the big factors that divide self protection from other forms of self defense training is you're dealing with life and death circumstances. And I think the biggest psychological obstacle for people to overcome is being present when the situation becomes dangerous and not hesitating. So we generally train our bodies through muscle memory primarily, which gives us physiological um, cues to fall back on. However, we also have this whole aspect psychologically, and the problem is because so much of our daily lives are governed by social norms and the way we interact is so dependent upon social norms. Often, when we're in a situation, we cannot get ourselves to be fully present in the understanding that this is a dangerous situation and it's not simply a contest. And this is complicated because, especially for men, unless you have a total confidence and a total understanding how to use avoidance at all costs, which is part of training, it's going to be hard for you to make that distinction when a situation arises. In other words, and this is very important, if I have in my training the understanding that I will try to avoid a violent altercation at virtually all points, and then maybe I can make an exception. And I'll give you an example of that, okay? I was in a situation a couple of times in the vehicle, and people did something really stupid, and I acted. Um, I'm not going to say if I was right or wrong, but it was a conscious choice, and I had control over that situation when I made that adjustment, okay? In my case, it had to do with the fact that my kids were in the car and somebody did something that was very dangerous, but it could be anything. The point is that right or wrong, that was a conscious decision and an understanding that I decided to act in that fashion. However, what most happens to people is they get into a situation which crosses the line between social and real dangerous violence. Now, some social violence can also be very dangerous, which complicates the fact. So, your understanding of that situation is really existential. It's based on your understanding. You have to make that jump and decide what is at stake, whether you can avoid the situation, whether you have some sort of way to create a barrier of a sort, or whether this situation is crossing between a socially sanctioned violent situation. You looking at me, you said something to me, which is usually avoidable, okay? Or it will turn into a dangerous situation if you can't avoid it. Or whether that situation cannot be avoided, okay? This gets people really tied up, okay? And it's very challenging to make that jump and to understand and be committed when you made that jump, why you did it. Because we live in a society where you'll have to explain why you did it as well. We all know the law and such. But we're also so programmed socially that we have resistance to that. So I'll give you a very good example, and I'll give you what I saw, which really put some perspective on teaching this to others. There's some sort of a video short where three guys are confronting one guy, and one of the guys is encroaching on him. Now, here's the situation for this guy. This is still somewhat of a social situation, but it's rapidly escalating into a 3-on-1 attack. Okay? We could talk about the alternatives here. Maybe if the guy had a weapon, he could step back and say, don't breach. Or he could even try to jump back and say, don't cross anymore. This is going to happen. I like what this guy did. Very creative, and I applaud him. When the guy was coming up to him, you could see that his friends were starting to circle. That's the time when your shit has to kick in, okay? Because when three people are circling to attack you, this, whether it's a socially sanctioned form of violence or not, whatever the reason, this has escalated to a truly very bad possibility for you. And what this guy did was he simply grabbed the arms of the first guy that was in front of him. As he grabbed this guy's arms and he was moving, the guy's friends started to circle. When he saw that, he cold cocked the guy, okay, and then attacked his friends. That was absolutely the right approach in that situation, one of many, okay? And we have to understand why that was. This was ingenious, and it's not for the reasons most people will think. The real problem here is when this guy was first confronted, he had to have some way to put himself into the moment, okay? He's not in the moment yet because this is a conversation, okay? The guy who's the aggressor always has the option at that point to escalate and has the numbers and the reason perhaps, whatever the case may be, all right? So he knows what will happen next. But the person who is being victimized does not. So how do you put yourself into the reality that this is an attack? Okay, well, what he did was he found a way to scale the situation. Okay, he could have grabbed that guy's arms and the guy could have taken a step back. His friends could have backed off. Okay, a lot of things could have happened. The fact of the matter is by grabbing that guy's arms, watching what his friends did, and feeling the resistance, it gave him the indications he needed, and he could now put himself into that moment. He could be fully present for this very traumatic and dangerous situation and act accordingly. Okay? This is a very, very important concept. The concept of your own ability to be comfortable understanding when violence is going to result. Okay? We're not comfortable with violence if we have any decency. We don't look at it as a normal strategy. However, in certain situations, it is the default strategy. And it's not so much understanding that as how do you put yourself into that position where you're capable of understanding that imminently in your actions, okay? And your thoughts. Getting angry and ready, responsive, okay? It's very difficult for us, if those three people are approaching, to just haul off and hit the first guy, okay? It's hard to do that. It's much more easy to have some sort of a bridge if you can create one, and you may not be able to. In this case, the guy created the bridge. He grabbed the guy in a way that he didn't really compromise anything. He had his arms, so the guy couldn't haul off without him knowing, couldn't do anything. But he let the guy's intentions fully manifest before the guy's physical actions could follow. And in that instant, he could act first. Okay? I want you to imagine the situation. Think it through, and you will understand why this is an example of a very smart thing to do. All right? There are other things you could do as well. This was one thing, one approach, and I would say it was extremely effective in this case. Okay? What's the alternative? Well, One alternative is, if you have the training, to not actually touch the guy and haul off, okay? Another alternative would be to create some space and then have a weapon, or give somebody a warning. That's not such a bad thing in a socially developing violent encounter, because you're dealing within the province of social norms, okay? And a person will think, if you say, if you don't stop, I'm going to do something really nasty to you, okay? And I'm warning you, don't come closer to me. You will get a reaction to that, okay? In this situation. But you have to know the difference between that and somebody who's coming at you with a knife, who's in some way psychotic. And I don't mean in normative fashion, psychotic illness. I mean, somebody is enraged and it's past that point, all right? But making these distinctions is where your training really has to come into play, all right? So there's things you could do that way, okay? Or you could do something to gauge, like this guy did, which was very clever. Anyway, think about this, and think in your training what it takes for you to know and be present and not avoid the situation. Because most people, what happens in a violent encounter, they have to overcome denial. We deny it. We say, this really can't be happening. It's not like this. We want to hide, okay? And you can feel that during a situation. You can very easily overcome that if you understand that, okay? That's a defense mechanism, all right? We want to be safe at all costs, so we try to reassure ourselves. But you have to look at that as simply a useless aspect of our human nature, all right? We are trying to deceive ourselves when we do that, okay? On the other hand, it has purpose, because if a person comes up, excuse me, could you spare some change? And I automatically go from 1 to 10, you can't do that either. So a lot of times when we have our superego, we'll use Freudian language here, okay? Telling us, oh, be a good guy. It's just a person who's a little out of control. This isn't really happening like you think. He's not out to get you. A lot of times we're right. So the problem is that we don't have, unless we're trained, the acumen to make a fine distinction when something like that is developing very rapidly and it's dangerous. So we do use the reassurance, but the reassurance shouldn't be used. Like in a situation like it confronted this guy, what you don't want to do is, these guys are just talking. It's not really developing this way. As you see his friends starting to circle, it's not, just, this isn't really happening. You'll notice your tendency to do that if you're in a situation like that. You'll notice things start to slow down, really. And you have to take those cues as your body's way of preparing and letting you know that you're in a big one. You got to be proactive and responsive and aggressive and utilize your training at that point. So look at this situation and some of the points I made here. It'll help you tremendously, I believe.